It's a pretty straightforward fact that having more frames per second in an animation makes it smoother. And although smoothness in animation isn't everything, a decent amount of it does have appeal. It can be incredibly time-consuming though to animate with high frame rates, especially if you're working with quite a bit of detail. I don't think a lot of people realize that there's more to the smoothness of animation than the number of frames you draw, and you can make an animation still have good flow without needing as many unique drawings. Here's an example of two animations that have the same number of frames played at the same speed. However, A still appears smoother than B. The only difference between them is where each circle is placed. Looking at the spacing, both animations use slow in, slow out, meaning the frames get closer together at the start and end of the motion to create the effect that the movement takes a moment to pick up speed and then slows to a stop at the end of it. However, in A, the smoother appearing animation, the frames at the beginning and end of the motion are so close together that they almost completely overlap. There's a lot of space left in the middle section of the motion. You might think that this animation played would look like a circle just teleporting back and forth, but instead, your brain fills in the gaps and sees it as moving really fast back and forth. I think a lot of people don't realize how effective slow in, slow out is in making an animation look smooth. Instead, there's a tendency to just keep adding more frames, evenly spaced throughout, and then maybe adding some slow in, slow out last, usually resulting in movement that just feels plain and robotic. And it's also pretty common to not realize just how much you can, and probably should, push the effect of slow in, slow out as far as it will go, making those first and last drawings really close together. When animating an action that goes from point A to point B, often what I do first is add one frame that goes after the starting one and is almost identical to it. The subject is just starting to move. Then I draw in a frame that goes just before the final one, and draw my lines really close to the final frame. This 4-frame animation looks like this. Might not be convincing enough unless your start and end positions are fairly close together, but if you're trying to work fast and keep your animation quick and simple, you could totally call this done. Otherwise, the next frame to add is most likely going to be one right in the center of the action, when the action is at its top speed. If you think more frames are needed after that, you can add 2 more on either side of that one, each of these a bit closer to the start and end of the action than to the center, to keep up the slow in, slow out effect. How many frames you'll need depends on how fast you want the action to look and what frame rate you're animating with. I've talked a little bit before about how I set my projects to 24 frames per second and then drag out my frames so that some hold longer than others. Looking at my timeline, you'll notice that the frames near the start and end of the action hold and repeat more times than those in the center. I do this to make the easing in and easing out of the action even more dramatic. To put it in other words, not only am I using slow in, slow out with the spacing of my drawings, but also with my frame rate, making the frame rate slower at the start and end of the motion. Here's a couple other animation tutorials if you'd like to see more. Thanks for watching!